All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Jillian Bradshaw. It's June 11th, 2024. We're at Beaux Frères in Newburgh, or at least near Beaux Frères in Newburgh, on the Troll Trail outside. And Jillian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happily.
First question, why wine?
Oh, I would say for me, wine is a vessel for storytelling. My background in terms of college training is in journalism and communications, and wine was sort of an accidental offshoot of that for me. It ends up that my degree is useful because wine is about capturing a time and place, and that's what journalism is about. So definitely glad that I have that background, but wine is a surprising sort of, not detour, but just a part of the world trail that I never expected would be for me. But I feel very fortunate. I really can't imagine what I would have been doing with the last 15 years if I had kind of followed a more beaten path, more obvious path.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. Tell me about life before wine. Tell us about where you were born and raised and kind of path into college.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, the city of good neighbors and the Buffalo Bills. I am not a sports person, but if you grow up in Buffalo, you're a Bills fan. It's on your birth certificate. My family is wonderful, and my mom is a social worker. My dad was a federal court judge for most of his career. They're now retired-ish world travelers and very social. My whole family is very social and outgoing. My older brother is an attorney who's maybe even more gregarious than I am, which is saying something. So communication and language and sharing stories was very much sort of part of our family culture. Wine, I wouldn't give my family, well, my parents in particular are not like wine aficionados. I think for them it's much more about kind of the social aspect of it. Definite theme in my upbringing was people getting together. Wine, small part of that. It's surprising to me how far I've gone down that wonderful rabbit hole. Yeah, I would say, part of my early life that was sort of formative is I was a Montessori school kid as a little kid. I think maybe one of the cooler aspects of that is that I started learning Spanish when I was 3. It's kind of a treasure to be able to practice that along the way now. I took many years off from Spanish, and now some of my coworkers here are helping me amble along toward returning my Spanish brain to function. I moved to the country area outside of Buffalo, Clarence, New York, when I was a teenager. That was a little dip into sort of rural living, but now I live about 10 minutes from Beaux Frères, a little deeper in the Laurelwood AVA, a little deeper into the middle of nowhere compared to, I went to college in Boston, so moving from a big city to originally McMinnville, Oregon, was a wild change of pace that was awesome. Now I live in a little corner of Gaston called Laurelwood that's unincorporated little, we've got a 10-acre paradise, kind of sort of feels similar to this in our backyard, which is dreamy. I always thought I would be a city person for life. After a couple of years of college, I figured I'd move to New York City, and then I met a tall redhead from McMinnville, Oregon, who I took a major liking to, and he convinced me after college to move out here. Right out of college, I worked at a coffee shop that doesn't exist anymore in Lafayette, Oregon, and one day the Jessica Bagley Rout, the owner of the Painted Lady restaurant, came in and pretty much ended up being a game changer for me. We kind of hit it off, and she invited me to go work at the Painted Lady as a server's assistant and kind of helping out with marketing. I think that was like 2006 or so. And that was when that restaurant was just getting started, and obviously they've built a phenomenal concept for fine dining. I think they're every bit worthy of James Beard and Michelin attention, and I'm sure it's not long before they have kind of more recognition in that. When I was working at the Painted Lady, they started introducing me to really beautiful Oregon wines, because obviously they have a really strong wine program there. And then the hospitality, fine dining end of service, to kind of start out at what I would consider, the tip of the hospitality world. It was kind of trial by fire, very strong focus on service and quality. So I worked there for a year and a half, or maybe almost a couple of years. Then I went and followed my a little bit more mainstream path into the nonprofit sector, which is kind of my mom has worked in the nonprofit sector for most of her career. I went to work at a nonprofit called idealist.org, which is sort of like Indeed for the nonprofit sector, and I was running career fairs all over the country, and that events experience, I think, has been an important part of my wine industry success. But I live in wine country this whole time. I was driving to Portland, but I'd go out wine tasting on the weekends a lot. And I eventually got invited to work, of course, Memorial Day for the Four Graces. And so I worked Memorial Day holding a bottle of Pinot Blanc outside, greeting guests as they arrived. I remember wearing like little gloves that got cold condensation from cold wine bottles. And, one year, that first year, it was just super cold. I got invited back to work Thanksgiving for the, pre-Thanksgiving hoopla, and again, holding cold bottles of Pinot Blanc outside, freezing my tootsies off. And, but it was still so fun, people just arriving and getting to welcome them. And, it's sort of one of those situations where you're like, am I really getting paid to do this? This is crazy. I think I'm just hanging out at a fun wine party. So at a certain point, it became pretty obvious to me that it was a viable career path to some small degree. So I went to work part-time working in, I think I was part-time at the Four Graces for a little while, and then I went to work at the Ponzi Wine Bar. Ponzi family, obviously an essential resource to anyone who wants to get into the Oregon industry. You have to recognize the pioneers. So the Ponzi Wine Bar was a really cool concept, especially at that time where they served wines from all over the Willamette Valley in Oregon that were hard to find little gems that, didn't have tasting rooms but were great wine, or up and coming, or kind of cult wines that never really needed to have a presence of tasting room. So I was pouring, Cameron and Brickhouse and Beaux Frères and Thomas, and really cool kind of wines that in the beginning I didn't really recognize how fortunate I was. And then Andrew Turner, who was my manager at the Ponzi Wine Bar, now has Valley Wine Merchants. He started to expose me to the stories of the people and the places and all the soils and microclimates. And we used to go maybe one Thursday per month, we'd go visit one of these producers that you pretty much wouldn't have access to otherwise, but Andrew just is so ingratiating, and he would get us, a tour at Cameron, and, the infamous closed sign on the gate, we got past it, which is, John Paul Cameron is such a unique and quirky and wonderful character. And Andrew just helped. We took the Dundee Bistro team, so it wasn't just us. And Andrew started to show me how to become a trusted advisor in terms of a sales mentality, much different from, I always hate to malign used car salesmen, but the old school sense of, they've come a long way, but the old school sense of that was, kind of my sales concept. Not that I had sold anything, but that's kind of how I pictured a sales career. But Andrew sort of taught me, no, if you have contagious enthusiasm about something that you're offering, and it's genuine and it's something of quality, you're just the ombudsman for cool things. Like, what a great way to sell. I think a lot of what I have been able to teach other people is direct quotes from Andrew. It's like his top 10 hits have become, really central to how I've been able to move my career forward. So I was the assistant manager at the Ponzi Wine Bar for a while. Then I went to work at Adelsheim, where I was managing mostly hospitality and starting to get into some of the other aspects of direct consumer sales, particularly managing a growing team, helping to advance more kind of a luxury high-end experiences, food and wine pairings, working with really talented chefs. Amy Griffith, I worked with her there. Now she's kind of a private chef. I think she's working at Argyle as well. She was someone who was able to kind of teach me about food and wine pairings and how to approach that from a wine-focused mentality, kind of start with the wines and then build the pairings around the wines as opposed to trying to do the opposite. Mm-hmm. So I worked for David Adelsheim for a little while, and then things took a really weird and briefly wonderful twist, which was Representative Earl Blumenauer was one of my wine club members at Adelsheim, and at a certain point he was looking for someone to join his campaign as sort of a coordinator, and he's so just wonderful. We agreed on pretty much all political topics. He likes bees and bicycles, and he's just so great, and bow ties.
And wine.
And wine, yeah. So we got along great. So I did decide to go experiment in the political realm, especially because the guy never loses. So seemed like an ideal way to experiment. I have pretty thick skin, but politics is like a whole new level of urgency. So it lasted, I think, 90 days. And I do believe I actually called my mom crying on day 90 when I had forgotten to get, Earl's birthday party was, every political person, if they have a birthday party, it's a fundraiser. And I had forgotten to get a cake knife and forks for this giant cake, for this giant party. And it was like kind of the end of the world in my mind. And everything is so urgent and just emergent that I figured out, this is not as fun as wine. And so I blessed and released myself from that role. And I think it was like a week later, Beaux Frères posted a job advertisement for like their first hospitality manager to run a year-round hospitality program that they were going to start. Because prior to that, for a long time, they were just open Memorial Day and Thanksgiving for years and years and years. And then they were open kind of like weekends in the summer. And then they were open for the summer. And then when I came in September, October, 2015, they had just decided we're going to try and stay open all winter. So that first winter, I think, was pretty much, feels like it was just me in a really cold tasting room for that first winter. Erin Armitage, who now works at Alexana, was just finishing up part-time seasonal that summer, and she sort of showed me the ropes at Beaux Frères. She was so wonderful and still a great friend. She set me up with a few kind of like guidelines for working at Beaux Frères that are really still important to me, like and things that have been reinforced by Michael Etzel and, you know, along the way repeatedly, but just honesty and trust and authenticity. You know, I think if there's one central rule at Beaux Frères, it's don't blow smoke up anyone's ass. You know, always be straightforward. It's very much a family vibe, even though we have new co-owners from France in the past several years. The rule is still the same, you know, mostly respect people's uniqueness and try not to, you know, it's not a fake it till you make it place. It's like a learn it till you earn it. And that, I think, is a major benefit to how I've been able to evolve within this company. And I started as the hospitality manager. I think then I moved into like director of consumer sales. Yeah, so many things now. As the company structure evolved, I moved into more of a director of sales role, so kind of taking a little bit more leadership role in national sales. We weren't doing much in the way of export at that time. Kurt Johnson, who's now at Soder, was running Beaux Frères national sales when I came, and he's such a huge personality out in the world and in the Oregon wine industry. You know, anywhere I've gone since then to do market work, they always say, where's, you know, for years later, where's Kurt Johnson? I'm like, the new Kurt Johnson. But Ryan Faddis, who's now the president over at Compris, he took on that role in large part until a year or so ago. And I think he more faced the where's Kurt commentary and really did a lot to help the Beaux Frères national sales world evolve. I think it's a brand that has a really strong reputation out in the world. And at the same time, there's always the goal of staying relevant. I think one of the risk factors being an early winery in the Willamette Valley is, you know, the curse and the blessing of all these up and coming, hip, new, cool wineries and offshoots and things like that. For brands that have been here for, you know, 30 or 40 or however many years, you know, no news is sometimes not good news. You know, you got to be sort of staying relevant and timely and fresh. And I think it's been fun to find ways to be creative and stay. The Troll Trail is a great example. I always feel like we have unique competitive advantages here in this little fern gully. You know, for some of our real VIP customers and friends of the winery, this is, and for our team, you know, if we're gonna, with my team, if we're gonna have a, you know, weekly meeting with someone in my team, and we don't need a computer, often we'll take a walk on the Troll Trail. And just like we are now, it's a great place to be less distracted, more focused, and more, I mean, being in nature is such a, I mean, I think everyone's blood pressure kind of goes down when you're in a green place. So I think this is a huge resource, and I think part of what makes it so special for me is to have access to this cool landscape and to share it. Yeah, it's been a really, you know, now I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing. It's been 9 years at Beaux Frères, and every place I had worked before was like 1, 2, 3 years. So it feels really nice to have that. You know, the learning curve at a new job is always unique. And so, you know, it's like moving into a new house. You like don't feel at home for a while until it's your stuff and your vibes have kind of infiltrated. And I feel like that has definitely happened by now. You know, sometimes people, oh, you've been there 9 years. And sometimes I feel like, whoa, that happened so fast. And sometimes it feels like dog years, you know, like I think I'm ancient now. I'm like these ferns in this place.
You mentioned the kind of the uniqueness of Beaux Frères, and I've heard some great stories about sort of being brought into here, being brought into sort of the Etzel family. So tell me about coming here and being brought in. What was the first year like? What were your first kind of memories, first experiences like?
Yeah. I mean, a great example is the advent of the Troll Trail happened about a year, maybe a year or two into my time. At the end of, you know, I used to get really dressed nicely for work. You know, I had come from more of an office background in the nonprofit sector, so I wore like jackets and, you know, shoes, like hiking shoes. And at the end of the day one day, Michael, you know, came upstairs to my desk and he said, hey, you want to go on a walk? And, you know, we went on walks in the vineyard a lot, but he said, we're going to take a detour, and I'd like to build a trail between our property that kind of gets us over to the Upper Terrace property. You know, it's like a quarter mile up the road through the woods. And if you'll come along, you can help me plan the trail. And every moment that we got closer to where we are right now, it got just more treacherous. And I'm saying, oh, you're going to need stairs here. Oh, you really think I'm going to need stairs? Well, yeah, you're going to need stairs there. And then, oh, people will hop over this little creek. Oh, no, we're going to need a bridge there with some railings. No railings ever happened. And, you know, we climbed our way through, and both of us, luckily, are not sensitive to poison oak, because up there was a nice little stretch of it. And it was early on enough in my time that, you know, when he picked up a clump of moss and made it into a beard, it was like hilarious to me. And first time I'd seen someone make a moss beard, and I've seen him do that probably 10 times by now. It's like a tradition at a certain point with a certain moss clump. But that's like a little bit of a microcosm of my experience here. It's like you just never know what the day is going to bring. You know, a year or so after that, Mikey had really built up our pig program, which is a pet pig program primarily. But Pork Chop, who's now passed away, she had a litter of piglets. I learned that a pig is pregnant for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, in case you ever wanted to know. And yeah, we didn't have exactly the right setup at that time, so she had her babies down in a really deep ravine, and it got really cold at night, and we had to like bring electrical extension cords to like put little heat lamps down in this total crazy gully. So lots of things unwine related have happened at Beaux Frères in my time. It's just, it's a very unique workplace. Michael instilled a very whistle while you work mandate in my time that he was more prominent in the winery. He still pops by all the time. This afternoon we're going to drive to deliver some wine to a great customer of ours down in Independence, Oregon. Really wonderful friend at this point who was an international croquet celebrity. Tremaine Arkley, wonderful supporter of the Oregon wine industry. So we're delivering wine this afternoon. We'll ride in Michael's Datsun, which is like the nicest 1970s Datsun that you could possibly see. It's a weird place to work. It's more of a pirate ship, and I think that gets said a lot. Submarine, pirate ship, depends on the time of year. Mm-hmm. Harvest is my favorite time because we get a harvest chef, actually Amy Griffith, who I had mentioned earlier. has been our harvest chef a couple times, and she'll do it again this year. All, eat lunch at a big long table, vineyard crew, hospitality, admin, harvest team, all at a table, cool, drinking the wines that we've been so fortunate to accumulate throughout the year. When wine folk come around and bring us bottles, we save them all up for harvest and then pop them with lunch. And that's a time to be alive. They say there's never a free lunch. Well, that's about as close as it gets. And we as a hospitality and sales team feel very fortunate to ride their coattails. Obviously during crush and harvest time, we get the easy end of the game. So that's definitely my favorite time to be in the wine industry.
I want to back up for a moment and talk about kind of introduction into wine. You mentioned kind of stops along the way where you Painted Lady, you had a little wine interest, and it seemed like when you were working with Andrew, you were starting to get kind of the in-depth. So tell me about your impressions at that point of the Oregon wine industry and of the wines here, of the people here. What made it something you thought you'd want to work in?
Yeah, I think my personality really lends itself to connecting in general, connecting people particularly. And Andrew really instilled in me that's what selling Oregon wine is all about. I think my first impression of the Oregon wine industry was this utopian web of just like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I think, it's like a trope in Oregon wine industry, high tide raises all ships. But we say it all the time because it's so incredibly true in this place. And I think that was true when I started. And I think it's still very true today. And I think partly that vibe has been pretty durable in some part because of the new entities who have come in quickly recognizing that they have to play the way we play or they're not going to thrive. I think when I worked for David Adelsheim, I was so fortunate as to be introduced to Eugenia Keegan, who's a leader these days at Jackson Family and for Oregon and beyond. And, she's someone obviously who everyone admires for having done, everything from vineyard to the top level. That's a weird way to say it because vineyard is kind of the top level, and back and forth. I think Jackson Family is a great example of an organization that plays so nicely, even as originally an outsider. They support Salud in huge ways, which is something I feel really passionate about. I'm co-chairing the Salud steering committee this year after a lot of years doing different roles in that volunteer position. But for these outside entities to take an interest in Oregon, I think partly it's based on what's already being done here. That kind of a small community feel. I think it has old world. It's easy for example, our French co-owners, it's based on these mutual affinities for connection and sharing and quality and just that convivial thing that is wine community. I feel there's a healthy amount of, I don't think it's as much competition as sort of egging each other on. Wineries in Oregon have so much opportunity to define what they do based on what they do differently. I think the wineries that are going to kind of be recognized on the world stage are the ones that kind of are proud to have their own thing going on and not trying to do exactly what their next door neighbor is doing, but respecting it. Michael Etzel's 70th birthday party was a couple nights ago, and it's not just people who are buying and selling fruit to Beaux Frères, it's everybody. It's just this wild, wonderful cohort of, there's a deep mutual respect, I think, between all the, between the generations too. I mean, I know that a lot of the old timers, for lack of a better term, really have a lot of admiration for some of the up and coming wineries and winemakers and operations that are kind of pushing the envelope. Chardonnay is a great example. Pinot Noir has been queen of the valley for a long time and absolutely deserves that place. But some of the young winemakers are the ones who are, looking at Burgundy and saying, like, Chardonnay needs a major bit of attention in Oregon, because I think now I buy as much Chardonnay as I do Pinot Noir, and I think that's partially because the new scene has a profound obsession with Chardonnay, and Oregon has this cool middle ground that we've kind of found between like bright, crisp, acid-driven and a little richness and roundness and maybe a little oak influence, but not too much. It's so refreshing to people when they taste Oregon Chardonnay and it's not what they expected. And I think Oregon is influencing other New World winemaking communities in that way.
Let's talk a little about selling wine, about your job and how it has evolved. So tell me about sort of showing up mid-teens, kind of the height of Pinot Noir mania, it feels like, if we look at it now. What was it like selling wine at that point? What was your job like, and how has it changed? How has it evolved since then?
I mean, I learned about Pinot Noir. I don't have any technical wine education. I've never done the WSET or any SOM training. And so I'm sort of idiot savant for Oregon wine. Pinot Noir, for me, it's a human metaphor so easily. I feel like it's kind of dumb luck that I landed in Pinot Noir country, but the fickle grape that bends to every variable so deeply, that's so cool. For Pinot Noir to go through a little bit of adversity, like with people, that's what builds character. That's what builds thick skins, complexity and balance and finesse and focus and purity and freshness. All these things that people achieve by kind of weathering some storms. That's Pinot Noir. It's nothing if not adaptable. Trauma is one thing. When a vine or a person experiences trauma, obviously you want people to be able to avoid that. But adversity is a different thing. There's distress and there's eustress. Distress is, anxiety and a feeling of not being safe. Like, people shouldn't have to go through that very much. But, climbing and toiling and working hard and not having every resource available to you all the time, that's people, that's Pinot Noir. So it's been really easy to get to know it as a varietal. Someday I'll learn about other wines. Maybe not, I love Oregon. I think we live in the best place. I think the Willamette Valley, my grandma always said it's God's country. I think it would be really hard to picture, selling other wines. It's tempting to start, I'm thinking about doing WSET because I really recognize that, get me 1 degree outside of Oregon and maybe like a little bit about France, a little bit about California, but I get really dumb really fast. Sales, when I started selling Oregon wine, a lot of people would come in and they were dumbfounded that this Oregon wine country is a thing, and they were, someone had just pointed to Oregon on a map for them years before, and they never thought they'd come here. And it was a lot of discoverers when I first started, and now it's people who come here every year. Not entirely, but it's definitely, I have customers who I've seen every year or multiple times a year who live in Texas, in Puerto Rico, in, all over the place. And it's a little bit skewed more toward devoted Oregon Pinot Noir fanatics. I think partly, obviously some of that has to do with Beaux Frères is on the world wine stage and, enduring brand that has had a lot of attention since the beginning, partly because of Robert Parker, Michael's brother-in-law, partly because we've got a really sweet spot up here that fortunately was stumbled upon. It's a really special terrain. I think the fact that this forest surrounds it makes it really special. Selling Oregon wine these days, it's not, I feel like there was kind of I think for a lot of Oregon wineries, there was this like little moment of ease. And in the post-COVID world, I don't know if we could blame it all on COVID, but I also, just how things evolve. I think there's a little bit more competition, not necessarily within the Oregon wine industry, but with other wine regions, people doing more international travel than maybe domestic travel. Every time I look at one of those surveys, there's new reasons that we have challenges as an industry. When I look at all the benchmark data, we grew like crazy for some years, and I think we all thought that would snowball continuously, and that's just not how things go. Michael always, said, "Oh, wait till you have a business cycle," and I sort of, whatever. Okay, that's a business cycle, and you don't think about these macro influences. So it's hard to imagine. Who would have imagined a pandemic? Like, never. But now we can imagine that. Now we can imagine losing an entire vintage almost to smoke taint. That was a crazy experience. Obviously a crazy experience as a winemaking team and vineyard team. But a couple of years later, it's a crazy experience for a sales team to miss an entire year of fodder. But that led to so much creativity. Among the wineries and within the winery, in the beginning, it's like denial and despair. And then out of that springs creativity. We made some white Pinot Noir. We made some rosé. We made a cool wine called Early Bird from the vineyards that we picked prior to the smoke. And like naming a wine like that, that's a really fun project. I think we all came out of it, it's the Pinot Noir analogy again. We went through some serious adversity, and I think we all came out thicker skins and stronger brains. I have, at this point, I feel really confident in being able to teach people how to sell Oregon wines. And I think that's because it's such a quality-focused industry. Of course, there are wines that are more everyday style or more lighthearted, and just like, I'm loving the creative, I was reading an article by a young woman who was writing about some of the ways that the Oregon wine industry is ingratiating itself to younger consumers and, canned wine to float the river with, like, heck yeah. There's something for everyone. Not every winery is going to have something for everyone, but if you take a cross section, we got it. Lots of little strategies in my sales approach that I've been able to teach are about the psychology behind selling things. I mean, an example, I always tell the sales team, like, make sure you pay attention to women. In the wine industry, it's the same as a lot of other industries. Women are major decision makers, especially about discretionary spending, and just, they have, I think maybe it's not fair to say, but women tend to have more interesting palates and tasting strategies, not even strategies, just like they come up with cooler things to notice in a wine. And I think historically, I won't say who, but I heard someone say that early on in my wine days, I sort of overheard someone say that men sell wine better. And I thought it couldn't be true. And it's not true. I mean, it's very individual how people sell wine. But I do think that when it comes to selling wine, acknowledging some of the strengths in your audience that are going to help them understand a wine. Like, I'm not trying to sell every wine that I pour for a group to every group. I'm trying to match people up with, like, oh, you cellar your wines, you're a collector, like, let me show you the wines that are really going to stand up for 15 or 20 or more years. But I'm not trying to sell that same wine to someone who laughs when I say, do you hold on to wine? Yeah, hold on to it till I get home, maybe. For that audience, you want something that's ready to roll. So it's more about matchmaking than selling, and you want someone to go home. I always want people to go home with maybe just a little bit less wine than when they get home. I want them to say, I wish I bought just a little bit more of that, not the opposite. Because then you have built that relationship and that trust, and you can really keep someone in the mix for many, many years. Selling Oregon wine is such a joy for that reason, because people do come back to this region, and once they maybe stop visiting, we have club members who have been in it more than my whole time, and many for my whole time, and that's just so, what a great luxury to know people who come to, I pinch myself sometimes, like when I'm taking people on a troll trail tour or walking around in the vineyard, like, is this seriously my job? It's a little part of my job, but it's a pretty cool part. Yeah, we're so lucky. I bet you hear that a lot.
I do hear that a lot, but not always sitting in an environment quite like this, though, where it's really easy to believe it.
Come on, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that obviously the Beaux Frères, an established brand, a very highly thought of brand, and has been for a long time. So, tell me about you mentioned kind of a double-edged sword with that, having to stay fresh, having to stay relevant. Tell me about the kind of the pressure you feel, if any, to handle a brand like that, to handle a brand with national, international recognition, and to keep it fresh. What role do you play in that, and how do you make sure that you're kind of honoring both sides of the history as well as sort of pushing forward?
I think working in a place that has a really defined origin story is a major luxury that not every winery, I don't mean to diminish the wineries that were like, someone had this extensive career in corporate finance and worked their butt off and, made a lot of money, and then decides they want to try their hand at, buying a vineyard or whatever. They're a basketball player, they're this or that, and they started out with this like real nest egg, and that's a great story in and of itself, and that's a, kind of a, in some sense, it's its own category with all these little subcategories within it. I think that's great because, there's new audiences that need to be welcomed, and they need ambassadors that are different. I remember being at an Oregon wine symposium a few years ago, and it seemed like the whole theme of it was like finding your story. And I feel like, that is not at all hard here. In the middle of the 80s, Michael and his Beaux Frères, his brother-in-law, bought this place on kind of a whim. wildest dreams, Michael always says, would not have shown him this. There is a focus on that origin story, but obviously the winery, now we're on our second generation wine grower, and Mikey is his own person, and he and his dad have this wildness about them that's very much shared, but they also are each their own person. Like Michael, maybe it has something to do with being older, but he's unfiltered. Like, you never wonder what he's thinking, for mostly for better. You're gonna hear exactly what's on his mind. And there's a lot of trust, and he has a really wonderful heart, so it works. But Mikey has much more inner monologue and is more kind of analytical and just has different skill sets. And that's really cool to see, and I think telling that story is something I really enjoy. This is not a winery that has stayed in one place. Mikey has, he created a whole nursery program here. So our new vineyard, the Bridge Vineyard right on the other side of these trees, that's from clonal material from the Beaux Frères vineyard, grafted in-house onto rootstocks that we're now growing here in our nursery. Thousands and thousands of vines being crafted within our, Michael always, when I came here and bought these little grapevines, they were 40 cents a pop. And then, now $4 and some odd. And now we make them here. Like, how proud Michael is of Mikey. I think that's been a wonderful asset to what we can share about how things are changing and evolving. So many experiments in the vineyard with, bringing in native plants to experiment with, yarrow and golden seal within the rows. Palissage, this cool trellising technique where instead of doing the buzz cut, you tuck all those shoots back into the vine, under the theory that it accelerates ripening in this cooler, northern-facing old vine section of the vineyard. Palissage, our 2017 wine where they bottled that separately, that's one of my favorite wines we've ever made. And those kind of barrel reserve wines that we made for many years in the last 10 years, that's new, that's cool, that's different. That's each of those wines has a unique story. There's never a lack of stories. I think it's just each winery and each vineyard, it's not just where they are, it's who planted them, and not just like the technical details of the spacing and things like that, but what did they decide about their whole landscape? Did they leave little oases of trees here, and are they bringing in raptors to help keep varmints out? And I love different wineries. There's a horseback riding tour between some of those Dundee. It's just, what do you have that's different? And there's no, I think that's, if you look at humanity and jobs, and there's no lack of paths. It's just, you kind of have to have what's your reason for being? And I think we have very much a luxurious, easy sort of story of evolution here. There's never a dull moment. We just had a little tasting room renovation and fresh coat of paint and tucked some of the wiring up into the ceiling. And people, when they heard we were doing this renovation, I got a lot of worried comments like, I hope you're not gonna, make it too sleek. We love the feel of coming to Beaux Frères. It's very low key and laid back. And I sort of bit my fingernails a little bit when we had our sort of grand reopening for Memorial Day weekend this year. But I think it was clear in the reception that you cannot, there's no amount of varnish that shines Beaux Frères up too much. it will always, I think, so far so good. A lot of changes, but I think the character of this place, like the character of lots of places, is like so deeply embedded that, yeah, it's pretty durable.
You brought up 2020 earlier, the both parts of 2020, the pandemic part, the harvest part. Tell me about the sort of the in the moment for you of 2020. Obviously, you talked about having the creativity that came later, and the obviously the challenges of selling a vintage that doesn't really exist. Tell me about 2020 and sort of the in the moment for that year for you. What were the initial reactions during the pandemic? What were the kind of the initial things you had to deal with, and how did your life change?
Okay, so on the bright side, for a while we had to do tastings outside in the middle of the winter. And at Beaux Frères, it's not a big, up until now, we're just starting to get ready to put heat in the tasting room. It was pretty much as miserable inside as it was outside for those winter months. So, silver lining, it was never warm in our tasting room, so moving people outside was sort of like still cold. I would say the worst part for me was having to serve guests while wearing a mask. That was a crazy experience because so much of connection is like being humans together. And if you can't see if someone's scowling or smiling or sticking their tongue out at you, there's kind of this subliminal divide. Also just, it creates this like kind of power dynamic where instead of being your trusted advisor, I'm more of like your server. It just has this kind of disjunct. That was really psychologically hard to overcome. In the beginning, we did, some virtual tastings, and at first I was like, ugh, this is bad. And then I sort of felt like, well, at least in a virtual tasting, you don't have to wear a mask. And that actually had some like relief in it. And we learned new things about how to connect with people who can't be in the same place. But it was some adversity. I think we all stretched ourselves in uncomfortable ways. I think if we have to do it over at some point, we'll make different decisions. I know Mikey has said if there's an incident where we see smoke on the horizon, pick. Don't wait and see what happens. I think, that's the same thing with if we see another pandemic, like we have a lot more tools in the toolbox than we had. That resilience, I think for adults, it was a big learning curve, but we came out of it with a little bit more strength. I think, to think about kids going through that is so hard. Just a whole different dynamic if you don't have some baselines already accomplished.
You mentioned your involvement with Salud earlier. Tell me about how that came to pass and sort of what you've done as part of the organization.
Yeah, I think it was, I honestly can't even remember when I started volunteering with Salud, but it was pretty close to the beginning of my time in the Oregon wine industry. And I got invited to pour wine at the gala dinner. And having come from the nonprofit sector, I worked for an organization called Trillium Family Services, which was one of the early beneficiaries of the classic wines auction. So I had some exposure to that wine industry generosity toward good causes. So someone invited me to pour wine at Salud at the last minute, and I love to get party dressed up. So it was really great, and such this like energy in that room, and such generosity. I knew I would want to volunteer every year, so I, every year did something with the event, whether I was pouring wine or in more recent years, my volunteer day of is part of I call it Team Hoopla, the Salud cheerleaders. Basically, during the auction, as people are getting into bidding wars, we just egg them on. I'm nothing if not persuasive, especially when I feel like everyone should be doing it. So that's a really fun thing. Salud is such an obvious asset to the Oregon wine industry. Obviously, paying and providing access to healthcare for vineyard workers and their families. I mean, anybody I've ever mentioned it to is like, yeah, that makes sense. They work for a lot of different organizations, and maybe they're working at 10 different vineyards, and no, they're not full-time anywhere, so they don't get healthcare. But maybe they do have healthcare benefits and they just have language barriers. Like, I hate calling the insurance company to do any kind of thing, and I can't imagine if I had to do it in a language that was not my first language. So I think my nonprofit brain really loves having that outlet. And I'm super proud to have a leadership role in the volunteer side of Salud these days. It's so fun. It's such a, I have no issue calling up friends in the industry and saying, like, hey, I know you have this villa in Italy. You want to toss it into an auction package or, whatever. I think people should recognize the marketing value of participating in good causes. I'm not super idealistic about it. It's not that I think everybody should contribute because it's the right thing to do. I think for some wineries, it's both the right thing to do from a do good standpoint, but it's also the right thing to do from a do well standpoint. Showing up for your community is a way to say we care and please care about us. Priceless. Super win-win-win.
So you talked earlier about sort of the since the pandemic and some of the changes you've seen in Oregon wine. Tell me about how the industry has sort of come out of in the past couple of years. What are the challenges facing the industry now from your perspective, especially from a sales perspective? And what do the next few years look like in your mind?
Prices are going up so much. I mean, a lot of it is supply chain stuff. I think that is a big risk factor for Oregon wine because I do think as an industry, some of our competitive advantage in the world is, Pinot Noir is pricey, but on a world stage, it's not as pricey as Burgundy. It's not as pricey as a lot of California wines. But as we catch up, and we also at the same time are trying to bring in new audiences, I just think there has to be a range. I don't think it will be healthy if every winery in Oregon tries to make a $100 bottle of wine. I think that's not at all sustainable. It doesn't help us build tomorrow's pipeline of wine enthusiasts. I think there should continue, and there is, there are wineries that are doing really great $20, $30, $40 bottles. And that's still, not gonna be a priority for all consumers. But I think if we can keep our pricing diverse, that would be a huge asset to Oregon. I think there should be wines that are, Oregon should have its share of world-class cult wines that you're going to treasure and open at your, 20 years down the road when your kid's graduating from high school that's not even born yet. Like, there should be some wines for that purpose. But there should also be river floating wines and low alcohol wines. And I'm a big fan of mocktails. If I'm traveling for work, when I arrive at late night at a hotel by myself and I just want to have a snack at the bar, it's always with a mocktail. I'm, happy for the progress in that area. I don't think it takes a thing away from the wine industry as long as we don't have a resentful attitude toward it and there's a time and place for everything. Maybe people are not going to be drinking just wine, but it's the same thing. People come to the Willamette Valley, they're not going to just one winery. They're not just going to wineries in general. They want to go on a hot air balloon ride and a horseback ride and go to the coast, and diversity in life of experiences, that's, we want people to want that, so I think the wine industry should, Michael always has said, deal from a position of strength. Don't get your back up because people are starting to have more, more variety of interactions with different beverages. Like, I drink a lot of fine teas. My husband is like a tea connoisseur. I've never been so impressed with the, black tea is not just one thing, It's like 1,000 different black teas and herbal teas and whatever. I just think, if we start to feel threatened, then you're threatened. If you don't feel like you have something that can compete, then that's the beginning of the end. So, I think we just have to recognize our value and do what we do best.
What about for your own future as you look ahead? What's coming next for you?
I mean, so far, I think keeping an open mind and within Beaux Frères, I think it's been a good strategy to just sort of identify where gaps are and do those things and learn those things and, create value based on recognizing where there's a need. I went from the nonprofit sector to wine, to politics, back to wine. I sort of, I would like to think that I'll do more creative things in the future. I sort of want to have a dog camp at my house as a retirement job. I just want to sit on my back porch and watch dogs run around in my yard. I think I have like about 10 things between here and there that will happen or more. I've been opportunistic, I would say. I think that's kind of what I mean. Like, if there's an opportunity to do something that I know is valuable, that I can do well, that's what I want to do. I don't think I have this like ideal dream job that's not what I'm doing now. It's just kind of meandering along and seeing, using my competitive advantages. Like, I am a communicator, and so it's unlikely that I'll be an accountant, at a computer crunching numbers at any point. I have a deep appreciation for people who have different skill sets than I do. Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I don't know. I'm open. Yeah, I'm following the breadcrumbs.
And the last question for you, what is your greatest accomplishment? What are you proudest of so far?
I don't know that I've ever thought about that.
That's what we're here for.
Shoot. Yeah, what is my mark on things? I've connected a lot of things, and that's for me a huge highlight. People, places, things. There's this great story, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell wrote this story called 6 Degrees of Lois Weisberg. You've got to read it. Short story. Not so short, but short enough. It's all about this old lady in New York who just at a certain point knew everybody and took such joy in like weaving people. And I think if I could kind of become that like hub of connection, that'd be pretty sweet. I just want to be a weird old lady who knows everybody and is unashamed to create community and connect. Whatever shape that takes, I will enjoy. I think I'm working on my gray hair collection.
And making a lot of connections already, of course, as you said.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. My husband always laughs because he grew up in McMinnville and has spent most of his life here in the Willamette Valley. And when we go places, it's like, oh, you're Jillian's husband. I love that. I think he doesn't mind that either because he's not a real people person, but it's a good feeling. I love to know people. You know, I don't think that's I thought it was a big city thing, but I think it's an everywhere thing. It's great to have your own little or big network.
All right. All the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover today that you'd like to cover?
I don't know. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a good communicator. It makes it pretty easy.
Oh, good. Yeah. Whew. Yeah. I think it's really cool how you guys are doing this, and I can't even imagine doing it every day, but you have a cool job too. Yeah. It's kind of like tiny desk concerts.
It is. It is very much that.
That's the feel I get.
Rolling out a very tiny red carpet every day is what we do.
Yeah, I always say we roll out the burlap carpet here. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this amazing space with us, sharing your story with us, and taking the time to be part of our work. And we're going to let you off the hook.
All right.
Thank you.